This is a special podcast presentation from 700WLW.com. This is Doc Thompson On Demand.
So the protests continue in Columbus. Jeff Berding joins me now, Cincinnati County Commissioner. How are you, sir?
Good, Doc. How are you?
I'm doing fine. This morning we're saying, is he actually officially stepped down yet or not? So
no,
you're still there.
I'm still there. I wanted to vote on the pension changes to make the Cincinnati retirement system solvent, and we have some votes on that today, I hope.
All right, so you're still officially with City Council?
Still around, yes, I am.
Tell me, this is really interesting when it comes to Senate Bill 5, that you would come out. I mean, most Democrats have come out against it. Say anything you want to touch the unions, you go away. We're not going to head there at all. Why would you come out and say Senate Bill 5 is such a good idea?
Well, because I've been on Cincinnati City Council for 5 years, and we have fiscally irresponsible budgets that I've voted against. The fact is that revenues into the city are declining. Our personnel costs, which make up 83% of the budget, are growing at 18% a year. That's unsustainable. Tax revenues aren't going up 18% a year, but given that 90% of our personnel are unions, and therefore the terms that are dictated to the city by collective bargaining contracts, something has to change. We can't ask the citizens for more money. Citizens, we have high unemployment. Citizens are paying more for their health care, paying more for their retirement, more across the board, and yet earning less. And yet government, our personnel costs are going up 18%. And this is just too important of an issue to stand on the sidelines because of political pressure and intimidation.
Do you hate firefighters? Do you hate cops? Do you think they do a bad job? Are you trying to take money off out of their pocket and food off the table of the middle class? Is that what you're doing?
Not at all. Look, I have a brother who's a Cincinnati firefighter, and I understand that he does one of the most important jobs that we do. He runs into a fire when everyone else is running out. Our police officers run to danger when everyone else is running away. I certainly value their jobs. The fact is I don't want to lay any of them off because their jobs are too important. The citizens of our community rely on them, and unfortunately, I mean, it's just common sense. If you have less money and your costs are going up 18%, you're faced with laying people off or raising taxes. And raising taxes will just make our community worse off because we'll lose businesses and we'll lose taxpayers who will flee to avoid paying more. And as my 11-year-old son figured this out, he said, so if I understand this right, Dad, if you have $100 and you've been paying 10 police officers $10 each, but now you only have $80, you can either pay all 10 of them $8 and they all still have a job, or you can pay 8 of them $10 and 2 of them are unemployed. And I said, that's the point.
Jeff, that's absolutely right. That's perfect. What I don't understand, well, maybe I do understand it. I have speculations. Whenever unions come up, whenever the discussion of unions, and listen, private unions, you deal with private companies, you want to unionize, that's a whole separate issue. When it comes to public employee unions, I am the employer as you and everybody else are. So that's something that falls under a more of a concern of mine. But whenever we discuss unions, automatically the hands go up. Defensive posture, everybody bands together. You can't even discuss this. And this is not the Industrial Revolution. This is not 1910. We are in a different world here. You know, some of the arguments for unions back then, and they were right, safety concerns, making sure people actually got paid when they work, those things are not a concern now. We have so many layers of laws protecting people while they're at work. We have OSHA, making sure that if you work, you will get paid. We have minimum wage, all of these things. So, Jeff, I ask you, in your opinion, why? Why can't the people who are public service union members, why can't they have an honest, open discussion and realize that things are different?
Well, I think that it's not uncommon in this country that people fight to preserve a status quo, whether or not the status quo is good for the rest of the country or good for the rest of the community. I think you could offer that the education system needs dramatic changes. If you saw the movie Waiting for Superman, which is a terrific documentary about public education, it's in many cases the kids come second. look, as it relates to unions, I understand, as you said, but look, this isn't an industrial union where the workers are getting together to negotiate against, the potential corporate greed or the big bad corporate management. I mean, in this case, it's the workers getting together to negotiate against the big bad taxpayers. I mean, the ones footing the bill. That is management, and elected officials are elected to represent the citizens who foot the bill for government services, and they should expect us to negotiate the best deal for them. Again, is the community better off? To use my son's example, is the community better off with 10 firefighters protecting us or 8? I think the answer is we're better off with 10. And so come up with a contract that allows us to maintain all those firefighters, all those police officers. I don't want to lay off anyone. But under the contract, again, 18% growth every year. How is that sustainable? 18%. It's not sustainable. And so we're forced into a situation where we have to lay off, or we raise taxes, or we dramatically reduce other services. And again, I think that on behalf of the taxpayers, they should expect us to avoid the kind of contracts that we've seen in the newspaper. A couple weeks ago, city to pay out $93 million, six-figure sums for unused leave. Another article, $23.6 million in extra pay, $1 million payouts to the police chief and fire chief. This is the kind of things that get put in a contract, and then because of binding arbitration, can never come out. And I think if people need to understand, the firefighters this past year, we had a $50 million deficit, and they asked for a 4% raise. A 4% raise, really? How are we going to come up with a 4% raise with a $50 million deficit? Of course we weren't going to be able to. But so they don't agree. Then it goes to a fact finder who splits it down the middle, which is, well, we're not going to give you a raise, but we're not going to cut your pay. We're not going to get rid of all these generous perquisites and payouts. And then the city administration says to council, well, this is still a bad deal. We still can't afford this. But if we go to the binding arbitration, which is the state law, and the binding arbitrator says, you know what, you need to give the firefighters their 4% raise, that's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars, which, again, with a $50 million budget deficit, you can't afford that. Was that the outcome of the arbitration, that it was a 4% or it's still pending? No, it didn't go to arbitration because the city accepted the fact finder's report, which was a status quo contract.
So you didn't lose any, but you didn't gain any.
Correct. And when you have a $50 million budget deficit, you're trying to gain.
See, that's the frustrating part, and I don't think that a lot of people in the public service union, maybe they do understand it, and like you said, nobody wants to lose anything, but I don't think they realize or fully comprehend that the rest of us have been doing that for a long time, and we've got almost a 10% unemployment rate nationwide. We've got most of us are not getting raises handed to us, even when we deserve them. Companies are actually downsizing, they're cutting, and we don't have that option. And we understand it. I recognize it. There's just not the money out there. Nobody's, raking in the dough and saying, I'm just not going to give you some. If you've got that big of a deficit out there, you're lucky if we don't cut, let alone giving you a 4% raise.
That's right. My wife worked for a company. She hasn't had a raise in 5 years. She has 14 furlough days. They don't match a 401k contribution anymore. It's just different.
But I want to touch on something right there. The argument that I've gotten in a lot of emails from union members at that point, the public service unions, they say, well, it sounds like you guys need a union. No, see, the problem is it's not that it's, Mr. 700 WLW sitting in Texas somewhere saying, well, I'm going to take all this money. There's not money to run it, and there's not money to run cities and states and the nation. We're in debt across the board.
That's right. It's just, as you said, there's just less money. And if there's less money, you can either pay your workers less and your workers are happy to have a job, and that's the reality, or you unemploy a bunch of people. You lay people off because you have to cut costs because there's less money. And the city of Cincinnati has been balancing its budget. Again, I've been voting no, but they've been borrowing from the Workers' Compensation Fund. They have been borrowing from the reserve funds. They've been not making their required contributions to the pension system as a way to avoid layoffs. But at some point, the music stops and the bill comes. And that's where the city's headed. And my hope is that through the changes that we're talking about in collective bargaining, we can sit down in a transparent way. I think we owe the workers open up every single book in the city so they can truly see the financial condition and say, here's how much money we have for police. How do you want to divvy it up? Here's how much money we have for fire. How do you want to divvy it up? I think that that's the right way to go. But under the current system, they're unwilling to do that because they know they can force it to binding arbitration where some unelected third party is going to pick a winner. And too often, they'll pick the union, even if the city doesn't have the money, and say, sorry, figure out a way to pay the bill.
It's not like we're thinking cops and firefighters and teachers are getting rich by any means. It's just a matter of you don't have the money, you're getting something that we actually can't afford. Hey, real quick, I want to mention S.B.5, the Senate Bill 5 that they're debating in Columbus. It wouldn't affect current contracts. Those are all etched in stone. Those are all grandfathered.
Correct.
This would be moving forward, right?
That's correct. It would give management, again, the taxpayers. This is in the public. Management is the taxpayers. It would give the taxpayers the opportunity to sit down with unions, knowing that some unelected third party is not going to dictate to us how much we're going to pay and how much services we're going to receive in response. It would allow us to sit down across the table, open up the books, and say, as I said earlier, this is how much money we have. We don't want to lay off your members. We hope you don't want to lay off your members. And by the way, another important part is it says that layoffs will no longer be just based on seniority. So every year, as you know, when the city of Cincinnati talks about layoffs, all you hear is all the young police officers, the most motivated, the best trained, the ones that are out there really on the front lines in most cases, are the ones that are first laid off. And this would allow a system where layoffs would be based on merit, would be based on personnel records in terms of discipline, and other criteria that I think would serve the public better as well, and maybe get the union's attention to say, well, you know what, maybe all of us need to be in this together and not just throw the young officers, out of their jobs.
I got an email that I'm assuming is from a teacher in the Dayton Public Schools. She has subject, your guest, at 9 a.m., please ask him a couple of things. What is a good wage for a teacher with a master's of firefighter police officer? Be specific on how a school or school district could be fiscally responsible without the assumed constraints of the union. So she's basically making the argument that because of the assumed constraints of the union, the city is fiscally, or school district is fiscally responsible now.
I would offer that the teachers and firefighters and police officers are worth whatever the market in that district or in that municipality can afford. I'm not suggesting that they're not worth good money, and for the record, the Cincinnati police and firefighters are considered by comparison to other municipalities well paid. And then you throw in the comp time, the vacation time that they get to cash in, the overtime allowances that they have, and it gets even better. And I understand that that's been bargained for over time, but in many cases those benefits were bargained for at a time 15, 20 years ago when, let's be honest, the city was much bigger, the city had a bigger tax base. The city could afford it. The economy was better. That's not the way it is now. But those benefits that were put in during those times are still in the contracts today when we can't afford them. And so I would say it's like anything else. How much are you worth, Doc? Well, you're worth what your employer is willing to pay you, or at the end of your contract, what a competitor is willing to pay you. And I would offer it's the same here. The school district has so much money. How much can we afford to pay our teachers? The teachers either want to work in that school district or they want to go somewhere else that maybe would pay them more. That's what our economy is based on.
All right, Jeff Berding, Cincinnati City Council. How are you? I appreciate you joining me. And moving forward, when do you expect that you're going to bail there?
Probably in a week or two.
Probably
pretty soon.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on how we deal with the unions moving forward.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. All right, get some of your calls coming up at 513-749-7800, the big one. I'll share a little bit more of her email with you and some interesting stats about the state of Ohio and how much we don't have. It's Doc Thompson, 700 WL. Fox 19 Storm Tracker forecast for meteorologist Frank Marzullo. Drizzle and cloudy this afternoon. High around 37. Partly cloudy and cold tonight. Low 25. It's 28 right now at the big one. Greg and Anderson, you're on the big one.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Councilman Berding just said.
Yes,
He's
sir.
talking about firefighters being greedy. Yeah, we went in asking for a raise, but that was only because they tried to take They went in trying to take $17,000 a guy away from our salaries, and we agreed on our contract, which City Council didn't even take the time to read and vote in. They voted it in without even reading it, and we accepted by overwhelming 95%, take a 0% raise. We gained nothing. So I don't think we're greedy. Most of the stuff that our contract keeps in there for us is safety stuff.
Did you hear him say the word greedy?
Yes, I did.
I don't think. I'm looking at Russ Jackson. He didn't hear him say greedy either. I didn't either. We could be wrong on that, Greg. Now, maybe you got that impression, but I don't think he said greedy.
Oh, maybe he did. Maybe he did, and maybe that's the impression I got. But that's just the way it seems to me. I mean, I feel like I'm a practical guy, and mostly what I'm concerned about losing as far as our ability to have contracts the way they are is our safety.
Greg, this is what I understand. And listen, I want you to know, I don't think anybody. I certainly don't want you to lose your job. I don't want you to lose money. I think it would be great if you could make $500,000 a year, $10 million. I really want that. I respect what you do. I can't do what you do. I think most people respect that.
Won't expect to make $500,000.
No, and I know that. I'm saying I think it would be great if you did. I want people to do well. I'm not, jealous of people. I'm not somebody who, I'm just trying to keep you down. And when I talk about things like the union and the realities of the deficits we have in the state and also nationally and locally, it's not all about the public employees. It's not all about the public employees union. They're a piece of the puzzle. But that's the reason you hear me talk about all of the misspending when it comes to government workers and the graft and corruptions and the outrageous spending across the board. But you're part of the puzzle, though.
But they put it all on our backs. They're the ones that vote this stuff in or not vote on it or don't even take the time to look at it.
No. See, and there's the other thing. It's not on all on your back. I heard a lot of people chanting in Columbus saying, you're just trying to stick it to the middle class. Greg, I'm middle class. Most of the people that work here are middle class, and we're all workers. Even that CEO who's making $10 million a year, whether he's worth it or not, he still works for a living. He still does a job. This is what I don't understand, though. Do you, as a public employee, understand what Jeff was saying about just not having the money? We don't have the money anymore.
I know we don't have the money, but why do they spend the money on some of the stuff they spend it on?
Well, and I'll agree with you there when it comes to stuff like the trolley car. Absolutely.
I can guarantee that if they're in, when our union goes and talks to them about opening up their books and showing us where they're spending the money, I guarantee if they were in dire straits and weren't misspending money, that there are guys on our department that would do what we needed to do to make things work.
Let me give you some of the statistics, though, and I agree with you on some of that. You're right; they misspend money all over the place. I still don't think that's gonna solve all of our problems. Let me give you a couple stats. In Ohio, over the last 10 years, we have lost 600,000 private sector jobs, and the jobs that are there quite often are paying a lot less because we went from losing more manufacturing where somebody may make $50,000 a year in manufacturing, and now they're making minimum wage working in retail store. But at very least, we've lost 600,000 private sector jobs in 10 years. However, when it comes to public employees, we have about the same number. That means all of those private sector jobs, we don't have all that extra revenue coming in from those people. They're not generating taxes. They're not spending. They're not buying mattresses and cheeseburgers. We're losing money across the board.
We understand that.
I mean,
how are you going to cut, 25, right now, the fire department, we're running 20, there are days we're running 20% short every day. We're rounding out, last Friday we rounded out 6 fire companies.
Wow.
Which is like 18% of our fire companies. Thank God nothing happened that day, but there's going to be a day with the way things are. They're not hiring anybody, which, obviously they don't have the money to hire, but they're not hiring anybody. There's going to be some bad things that are going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you what, Greg. I appreciate the call and the information you share in your story with me and your thoughts. First and foremost, we have to get a handle on spending and the misspending. I mean, aside from all of the public employees, we have to get a handle on spending. But that's also part of it. I want you to make money. I want you to do well. I just want you to do it as an individual. America was built on individual freedoms. individual responsibility. You as the individual saying, I'm going to go cast my net upon the water and reel in as many fish as possible. And when you talk about the need for unions from the past when it came to safety and stuff, come on. You know we have rules to protect you. You know that there is the legal system, courts you could sue. All of these things are at your disposal now. More of your calls coming up, 700 WL. Coming up today on The Big Show with Bill Cunningham. Do events in the Middle East signal the end of times? News you need at 2:06 on 700 WLW. Speaking of the Middle East, we will dive into what that's going to mean for you at the gas pump at 11:06 this morning with an economist from the National Petroleum Association. Many people were already predicting $5 a gallon by 2012. Within a year, $5 a gallon. But now, because of Egypt, well, they control the Suez Canal, and that's where we ship oil out of, or at least a sizable portion of it. And also because of Libya, who is an oil-producing country. You've already seen gas prices, or oil prices anyway, spike today. We shall find out if it's going to get worse. We'll do that at 11:06 this morning. New York, like a lot of different states, has unsustainable long-term obligations to their huge public employee pension fund. Wisconsin, Ohio, a lot of states are dealing with this. The governor of New York has talked about layoffs across the board and major budget cuts. You got some people saying, no, what you need to do is increase taxes. New York taxes are outrageous to begin with. There's a New York City councilman, Charles Barron. He's a Democrat from Brooklyn. He said he wants no cuts, no layoffs, more taxes, and he is campaigning on this. Now, he is somebody who used to be a Black Panther. He turned activist, went into politics, did the whole thing. He was at an event where the governor was speaking. He started shouting, "Shame on you," got other people to start chanting, "Stop the cuts," and then they started chanting, "Tax the rich, tax the rich." Is that the solution here? Is that really what you're wanting as a public employee, more taxes? Are you wanting to tax the rich? Is that how you see it? I've seen a lot of videos and comments online where people are just blaming those CEOs for getting, hundreds of millions of dollars, which I agree with you. That sounds ridiculous to me. I've failed to see how any CEO would be worth $200 million, $100 million. The golden parachutes they get. Doesn't make sense to me. But you don't have to do business with that company. You don't have to buy their products or services. You don't have to own stock in the company. But when it comes to public employees, we are all the employers, and we do have to do business with them. How do we close the gap? I'm looking for reasonable people. People that understand that, yeah, it's about government overspending in a lot of areas, waste, fraud, corruption. But also part of it comes down to those unions, the public employee unions. The other one, you do what you want. If I had a business, I wouldn't negotiate with you. No, if I had a business, I absolutely would not negotiate with unions. I'm sorry. I would do it, and you know what? I would shut the business down before I did because I don't want to be held over a barrel. I don't want somebody controlling me that way. Call it a character flaw, but I don't want you controlling me. I also, as a business owner, would pay people very well and treat them very well. You work well, you'd get paid well. But that's the private area. I do happen to be an employee of sorts, or an employer of sorts, just like you, because people who work for the police, fire, teachers, all of the public sector, they are our employees. In some ways, they're their own employee. So how do we do it? Are you going to be reasonable? Are you going to recognize that there's a lot of things that go into it, but we do have a problem with pensions in America? The retirement plans are just crazy. How are you going to do it? Is it tax the wealthy? From 1989 to 2010, 21 years, labor unions spent $500 billion on elections. $500 billion. Where did they get the money? They got the money from you employees, you union members. $500 billion, $500 billion to influence elections. I know you're thinking, what about all the... That's more than any other group. It's not even close. That's more than the big pharma. It's more than real estate organizations, the tobacco industry, big oil, doctors union. It's more than any doctors groups, any of those. Labor unions, $500 billion on elections. Is that where you want your union dues going? And who do they back? Traditionally, pro-union, progressive candidates who want to do what Mark said, just tax the rich. We don't have a spending problem, Doc. We have a revenue problem. A revenue? How about your house? Apparently, you see the government as being different. They can just go out and continue to get more money, unlike you and I. Where are they going to get it from? Tax the rich? Great. How does that play out over the long haul? Where does that go? Eventually, we all have the same amount? Is that what it is? You have to continue to follow that progression of thought. We got Scott Delhi. You're on 700 WLW.
Doc, I don't think it's fair when you compare the private and public sectors. I mean, you're talking about, if you take away the police union and then you say the police force, a policeman can go in and negotiate with his superiors his salary. Well, that's not the same, because he doesn't have the ability to go bargain with Joe's police force. There is no free market competition with these organizations.
There isn't now.
Well, so you think that there's going to be another police force that's going to spring up, that's going to be a competition for the government's police force?
Number one, there's competition all over because they don't have to be a police officer, first of all. Second of all, they could become a private police officer. They could do security at the Bengal Stadium or someplace else.
Well,
they could also, Scott, go to a neighboring town or a neighboring state. So there's competition among communities.
Well, that's not actual competition. And I'll tell you why. First of all, a private police force, that's not the same job. They don't have the same powers. So that's apples and oranges. Neighboring towns, neighboring states, they all pay about the same amount of money because they're in the government. We're talking about private
That
jobs.
is right. Wait a minute. Right now, they do. And first of all, that's misleading anyways, because people do make drastically different things across the country when it comes to fire and police.
Only because of the area they're in. If you take comparable areas, they make very similar amounts.
Yes, exactly. But California,
if you're in a very tough,
quite often, California makes much more in those for those positions.
If you're in a very tough city where the job is harder than, say, a country town,
No. That is not always the case either. Wealthier areas also traditionally will pay a little bit more.
Right. You're right. Wealthier areas will. But you cannot compare the private sector to the public sector.
What do you mean? I just did.
Yeah,
I told you, number one, you don't have to do that job. Number two, there are similar law enforcement jobs available. Similar, albeit not exactly the same. And you can also do competition amongst communities.
And there's something that you just said that's very key, and I'll explain why. Because you've been asking why it's so important that we have these unions and everything to keep these salaries at a reasonable rate, and I'll tell you why. Because you're right, you don't have to do that job. So once you take away competitive salaries and the government starts paying whatever they want to these people, okay, the best and the brightest are going to go to the public sector, which means our teachers, our firefighters, and our cops, okay? The levels of quality of the people who work there are going to go down drastically. You just said it. If you don't think the pay's right, go somewhere else. That's what's going to happen. The good people are going to go to the public sector or the private sector.
So you recognize half of the principles of free market.
No, I recognize all of them.
No. You recognized half, that the good people will go away. And then what do you think will happen in those communities if people recognize that their public services are not what they want them to be? Will they just say, oh, well, everybody fled to the private sector?
They will leave those communities.
They
just
will
like
either.
Detroit.
Oh, so the only possibility is they will leave the communities. They wouldn't at that point ever say, maybe we need to hire some more cops. Maybe we need to pay them a little bit more.
No, because nobody.
Oh, okay. See, as I said, Scott, you recognize half of the principles of free market. You recognize half of them.
Look at Detroit and tell me what's happening to that city.
And you think Detroit's only about them not paying cops and firefighters
it's
enough?
About
That's
a lot
it?
of it. But, part of the problem is revenue, and Berding said it earlier when he said that we're not making the same amount of money we are, and there's not the same amount of people here. And there's a reason for that, because corporations have been taxed so much that they've left this state. Okay, and the last 3 or 4 governors are responsible for that, and the legislatures who did that. We're not making the same amount of money, and it's because people are leaving our states and cities.
So you recognize that Detroit has a problem?
Yes, I do.
And you recognize, of course, the unions control Detroit?
No, the government controls Detroit.
The government and the unions, Scott. They have collective bargaining. They have unions there for the public employees, and people are bailing anyways. Yeah, you simply only want to take part of the principles of free market and capitalism and apply them, but you don't want to apply the rest. It's absolutely ridiculous.